Power is a part of our role as a leader, but how we view it, use it, hold it, and even share it will determine our ultimate success. That is our focus today. The role power plays for us as a leader and for and with our teams, specifically how we can share it and get better results for everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger positive difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. That's why we're here, and that's why I'm glad you're here. If you're listening to this podcast, you could in the future join us live, like some people are doing right now. And if you want to do that, you can probably find us on your favorite social media channels. And the best way to find out when those are happening and how to get connected to those is by joining either our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. We're on those channels and others too, but either of those will tell you how to find what we're up to and get connected for these lives. You can just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to get that information, to join those groups, to get access to other information and find out when the lives are going to take place. Today's episode is brought to you by our Remarkable Masterclasses. Pick from 13 important life and leadership skills to help you become a more effective, productive, and confident leader while overcoming some of your toughest challenges. Learn more and sign up at remarkablemasterclass.com. And so now that I've done that housekeeping, it's time to bring in our guest. And there she is. If you're watching, let me introduce her to you and then we'll dive in. Her name is Tania Luna. She is an entrepreneur, psychology researcher, and writer. She has founded and grown multiple companies, including Scarlet Spark, a nonprofit that creates human-friendly workplaces for organizations that help animals, and Life Labs Learning, a leadership development company. She's the author of 3 books, including her latest, Lead Together, Stop Squirreling Away Power and Build a Better Team. She is also the co-host of the podcast Talk Psych to Me and a TED speaker on the power of perspective. She is our guest. I am so glad that she's here. Tanya, thank you for being here.
Oh my gosh, so excited. Hello, and hello everyone out and live. And
Live and
I was
later,
gonna
right?
and later, live and later. Yeah, I was like, what's the opposite of live? Oh no, live and later is much better than what I was gonna say.
See, here's one thing that I already know that we have in common, even though we've only talked for like 5 minutes before that we went live. And that is that
Yeah.
we both have a love of alliteration. Like it's pretty clear to
Yes.
me that we do. And so I like to say live and later. So Jackie from Memphis is with us live. As you can, hi,
Hi,
Jackie. We're glad that you're here.
Jackie.
So, all right. Um, you didn't when you were 6 years old, you didn't say, I'm going to be an entrepreneur, a psychology researcher, and a writer. Like there's something about your journey that we probably ought to know. And I don't want you to give us the full rundown of your life, of course, but give us a little context because context is important. A little bit of like, how do you end up at this place having this
Mm,
conversation with me?
yeah. I ask myself that question every morning. No. So I think it probably starts with the fact that my early childhood had a lot of change, uncertainty, unpredictability. I'm from Ukraine originally. We got to come to the US as refugees after the Chernobyl accident in Ukraine. So a lot of kind of upheaval. We moved to a place that was not immigrant friendly. And I kind of I think that had 2 impacts at the same time, which sound like they're gonna sound like they're opposite, but they're connected in how my path, laid out. One was that I really learned this coping mechanism of taking control and kind of having as much power as I could so that I didn't feel vulnerable, so that I didn't
Yep.
feel a lot of uncertainty and surprise. And so that taught me to take on a lot of responsibility, to take on a lot of leadership
So can
roles.
I
It
stop
was
you
like,
right there? I don't,
yeah, please.
because I think you just made a really important point. So a
Mm,
lot of people, when they first become leaders, for all the reasons you said, I'm insecure, I'm not sure, I want to take as much control as I can, as much power as I can. And so
yeah.
so anyone who's listening, if as we go through this conversation, if you're like, man, I really should have figured this out before now. Like, no, that's a natural,
Mm.
common, and understandable choice. So go ahead.
And it's a coping mechanism, right? And coping mechanisms could be very healthy and they could be damaging if you don't kind of look them in the eye at some point when you're secure enough to be able to do that. It led to lots of wonderful things, but as you and other leaders know, being a control freak also can only get you to the impact that you want to make to only to a point, right? Like you can have some control over what is directly in front of you. If you want to make a larger impact and you have to involve other people in that, all of a sudden that thing that was great becomes your biggest obstacle for growth. So, okay, so that was one aspect of it. I think, I started kind of like taking on all of these leadership responsibilities. Even in elementary school, I was like the president of the student council. Why? There's no real reason to do that. I used to start all these groups and
Someone
things like
has
that.
to.
Someone has to. That's true. Yeah. So, I started my first like official company when I was in my very early 20s. I won this entrepreneur contest. So it was kind of also I'm just curious and interested in lots of things. So there's some healthy reasons as well. The other thing that I'd say led me to this topic of being really fascinated by the topic of power is that when I did start school in the US, it was kind of shocking to me how hierarchical and overpowering it was. Like I remember having this argument with my teacher who said, "You have to use a pen. No, you have to use a pencil." And I said, "I'd like to use a pen." She was like, "No, you have to use a pencil because I told you so." And I was like, "Well, that's not right." And so, right from the beginning, I both liked being in control, but I was very suspicious and skeptical about environments where one person or a small group of people have control. Also, coming from the former Soviet Union, like that was a problem in our
But you
in our
didn't really
country.
get the paradox or the irony of that, right? Like, I want control, but I don't
No,
want to be controlled. Like, that's a
not
that's
until
a whole
much later. Yeah, still working on that one. Yeah. So I think that's what it was, and again, like studied psychology from an early age, in part because it's just what I'm curious about, in part because it was a coping mechanism to understand these strange humans that I was surrounded by and that I myself was, and became really fascinated in organizations as a space for change and learning.
So the reason that I ask this question almost every episode, and some people sort of give us a chronology, but what I'm always kind of hoping is that people will do what you just did, which is give us context. We learned a little bit more about you, and we sort of learned a little bit about why it is that this topic that we're going to talk about today is so important to you, and it's clear that it is, and I love that, and it's an important topic, and it's a topic that I think that is often misunderstood, mistaken,
Mm.
etc. So
Yes.
we're going to get into all that for a second. But you wrote this book, Lead Together, which I'm sharing. You can see it if
Thank
you're
you.
with us live, and it's a parable. And in fact, there aren't humans; there are squirrels. So
That's
my
right.
question to you is, why did you pick? I'm just curious now. Why
Hmm.
did you pick a parable?
Mm. Yeah. The kind of the most honest answer is I was just so sick of reading and writing nonfiction. I was sort of like, there's got to be a more fun way to do this. Don't get me wrong, I still read tons of nonfiction. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful medium. It's exactly what I need sometimes when I just want to get to the point. But I wanted something that felt a little bit more engaging for me and hopefully for readers. But also, there's so much research that shows that we learn best through story. And so I was thinking a lot about that. How do I, create this vehicle for learning about what feels sometimes like a scary, uncomfortable, or taboo topic in particular?
And the reason that I bring it up, as you know, if we were having, inside the author's studio kind of podcast, then
Yes.
you and I could dive into that a lot more. But the reason I
Mm,
bring it up for all of you listening today is that, we across my desk come lots of parables, and there are lots of
mm,
them, and I've done a few here, but
mm,
often I sort of say, and in part because they're hard to do these podcasts about. And so
mm,
while we can learn from stories, a lot of people say, I don't really like to read parables. So here's what I want to
mm,
tell you all is that back at about, I don't know what page is, about page 200, and don't worry, it's earlier than that. It's like page 180 something. And it's a
mhm,
small book. So while there's
mhm.
170 pages before this, you really get into like, if you didn't want to read the parable, the
Yep.
whole book is in the back and
Yep.
really far more accessibly
Mm,
than is usually the case. And the other thing
mm,
compared to many parables is there's and this is no negative about parables. I mean, some of the people that have written some of the most famous ones are people that I know, but
mhm,
usually they're written around three, four, five big points, and yours has that, but there's more depth here. So again,
Mm.
I share that because maybe you're a parable lover, maybe you're not. I think this book is for you either way. So
I appreciate that. And
there.
in part, it mirrored some of my own journey or story. Fast forward from fifth grade, where I was president of the student council, to being co-founder, co-CEO of my last company, Life Ops Learning. I went on a journey similar to the squirrel character in this book of, oh my gosh, it feels like, in this book, it's a forest recession. In our case, it was an actual recession and COVID and all this stuff going on. And so much of that experience really fortified my own understanding of how easy it is in those moments of crisis to try to hold on to more power, and how crucial it is actually to be share power so that you can achieve this collective state of resilience and flourishing.
So now that we're there and we've talked about this idea of power that you called taboo and I called misunderstood,
Mm.
what are your general comments? Like, if we're going to talk about power for the rest of our time, which we are, the
Mhm.
question is, as the author, like, what are your general thoughts about this word or idea?
Mhm. Yeah. Maybe I'll start with two. Obviously, I can talk about this for a very long time, but I'll start with two kind of tabular pieces. Because one of the reasons it's hard to talk about power is we don't really have a shared definition of what is power. We often think it's just like this kind of bad word, or if you're power hungry, maybe it's alluring, but what is it? And a really simple definition I like is power is the capacity to get things done. That's all it is. If you want to get something done, you're going to need power. If you want your team, your organization to get things done, you're going to need power. The more power you have, the fewer obstacles there are to achieving whatever that goal is. So that's probably part one. Anything you want
So
to say there?
so here's
Yeah.
the analogy that I think of is, I had to flip the switch on to have power in this room. I had to have power
Yes.
in the house to power to
Right.
get things done. In this case is to have the lights on. And trust me, in this particular space right now, I got lights overhead, I got lights here, I got lights over here. And
That
so the
power.
more power, the more
Mhm.
ability to get this done, which is to make me look as good as I could possibly look in this
Which,
particular
for podcast
situation.
listeners, I feel very sorry that you're missing out on this excellent lighting right now and how terrific you look.
Well, we'll just stay with the thank you, but we'll just stay with the lighting part. So, I'm sorry I interrupted you. You said there was a second thing you wanted to
No,
say.
no. No, no, and maybe I'll just to add on to what you were saying just now, right? Like, yeah, power could be as simple as I need to power the lights in this room. But power could also be, of course, it could be what we often think about with power, like access to um, really scarce and important resources, or maybe it's authority, maybe it's skills or knowledge, maybe it's influence, maybe it's information or context, as you started off, the show with, right? Context is power. So there are many different flavors of power, but at the end of the day, it's power because it's enabling you to get something done. So that's kind of part one.
So the
So yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead.
please go ahead. No, please go ahead.
I was gonna say, okay, so then the other thing that I would define is a concept by an incredible scholar from the 1800s, 1900s named Mary Parker Follett, she's a character in the book. She's a squirrel character named Mary Parker Forrest. A lot of puns in this book, so readers beware.
There are
Um,
puns and there are connections to squirrels. There is no question.
There's
Um,
definitely squirrels, yes, as well as, squirrelized, humans in squirrel form, many of whom gave their blessing to be in this book, who are leaders in this field of understanding how power plays a role, particularly in the workplace. So Mary Parker Follett, not Mary Parker Forrest, Mary Parker Follett made this really important distinction that plays a big role in the book Lead Together, which is the difference between power over versus power with. Power over is all about using power as a means of control. Right? So I have that, let's say, decision making authority, and I just use it to tell everyone what to do. You can picture it's kind of hierarchical. You're pointing at me right now. Exactly right. It's that sort of, yeah, top down
My
leadership.
way or the highway. Like, there's a new
Yes.
sheriff in town, right?
Yes. Yes. Oh, I've always wanted to say that. Yes. And I'm not going to argue that there might be some cases where you need to flex into that power over mode, right? All of these modes are options. The issue becomes is if you're chronically in power over, and if that's all you're doing. Power
Yeah.
with is
Let me make a
using the
comment before you go to
yeah.
part with, and
Yeah,
that is
please.
that when I work with leaders on this, I say, there's a place for
Mm,
this,
yeah.
right? In a
Yeah.
moment of chaos. in a
Mm,
moment of crisis,
mm,
right? We may need someone to sort of say, "Hey, someone's going to say, you go here, you go here, you go here. We got to get
mhm,
started. We don't have time in that moment, but we can't stay there, right?" Which is exactly
mm.
where you're headed with the idea of power with. So go ahead.
Yep. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So with power with, the idea there is that you're using the power you have to grow the power of others around you. So it becomes this kind of coactive form of power where in power over, at the end, yeah, we get things done, but only my own strength has grown. Everyone else's hasn't. Power with, I'm using my authority, my skills, my knowledge, all of that. I'm sharing that with others. Their power, their capacity to get things done is growing, which means my own power and capacity is growing. And increasingly, that means we can get a lot more fun stuff done.
Right there, everybody. That's some of you are right, driving, or don't do this if you're
Mm.
driving, but like if you're exercising, stop and take notes because you just got a really important idea. Notice what Tanya said. She said, uh, power with allows us to grow the power of others, which then grows our power as well. The reality here
Mhm.
is this is not a zero sum game. The,
Yes.
the, the mindset of power over is there's only so much of it, and I'm going to grasp onto as much of it as I can.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
power with says, man, we can more there's more of this available to all of us when we tap into it this way. Am I
Yes.
You're
You got
nodding.
it exactly. And I really appreciate you bringing that up, Kevin, because oftentimes when I talk about sharing power, people assume that I'm meaning kind of a servant leadership approach where you're just kind of giving away and you're sacrificing. And no, absolutely not. The beautiful thing that starts to happen is unlike most other things in life, power is one of the rare things that grows when you give it away, grows when you share it. So, for example, I work with a lot of leaders who are struggling because, they're burning out. They can't delegate because no one around them has either the skills, the knowledge, or the motivation to take on those tasks, or maybe
Or
all
they
of the
think
weight
they
of,
don't, or
or
the
they think
leader
they
thinks
don't.
they don't, but that's their
Absolutely. Right.
perception at that moment. Yep.
Exactly. Yeah. So sometimes it's reality, sometimes it's perception, or maybe just there's so much weight on their shoulders. They're making all these decisions on their own. Now, if you instead turn to, well, how can I grow the power of my team? How can I either give them more information, more skills, more access to important relationships that they need? Once their capacity starts growing, all of a sudden, either I can just take a vacation for once, which also grows my power because it grows my, resilience, or I could start taking on bigger challenges and things that I wouldn't be able to do otherwise because I'm buried under this load of work that I can't share with others. That's just one example of how it can work in practice.
Yeah, it's not a zero sum game. When and to your other point about uh, it's not just about sharing it or parsing it out,
Mm,
because that feels like I'm giving something away and it's taking something away from me. And even
mm,
if you really buy into what Tanya is saying, the reality is it still may feel like that at first, but it doesn't have to
mhm.
stay that way, right? So
Yeah.
if you're feeling that, or even if you start to apply some of the ideas you're hearing today, it's okay if you feel that at first, but just remember that's not really the end game here. This isn't
Yes.
like there's 52 cards in the deck, and if I give seven away, I have 45 left.
Yes, power is like magic math. Like I give away 57 cards, all of a sudden we all have 100 cards. And you're right. And a reframe that I often recommend for leaders, and that I remind myself, because like remember, inside of me still lives the control freak and the person who believes that groups are better when people have shared authority and responsibility. So to my control freak and to leaders that I work with, I often invite the frame of it's not giving up control, it's giving power. Giving up control, that is a scary, uncomfortable, like going down a roller coaster feeling. Um, but you're not giving up control. You're not losing anything. You're actually looking at the individuals that you rely on and you're looking at how do I fortify them? How do I build their capacity? And that often just that shift in perspective, that different frame can already make it feel better. But you're right, it still will often feel uncomfortable. And that doesn't mean it's a bad thing.
Yeah, and it won't necessarily stay that way. That was the point I wanted to make. Is like,
Mm,
anytime we do something new, if the first step seems really, really hard, like, oh, maybe this wasn't the right thing to do, and I'm just saying, lean in to the
yes.
mindset that you're hearing, and take that first step boldly, knowing that it's
Mhm.
going to be different. It's not going to continue to feel the way it feels when you take
Yeah.
that first step. That's the point that
And
I'm
it
trying.
doesn't have to be radical. Like it could be that, you the way you lead your organization is all decision making is distributed, everyone has a voice and ideas can come from anywhere. I love that model. But also it could be as small as, well, this week, instead of telling people what to do, let me ask some questions and help them figure things out on their own. So they're building those muscles. Or, this week, instead of making this decision alone, I'm first going to ask for input and then I'll decide. So it's those little power building habits that can ultimately get you to a place where you're like, oh my gosh, we have this 1 + 1 = 3 or equals 10 situation where all of us bringing our power together can achieve these amazing things.
100%. So you talk in the book through the voice of the squirrels about four power with principles. And I'm just going to
Hmm.
have you just sort of state them each and give us a little bit on each, and I'll drop
Yep.
them on the screen as you go. Four principles to start to, because what we've really talked about so far is a mindset, right? Here, this is
Hmm.
a different way to think about it. But now, what are the principles, and what are and sort of how does it really work? So why don't you
Yep.
do that real quick, and I'll just drop them on the screen as you go.
Okay. I'll stay high level. Of course, the book will go into the details of how does this look in action, both in squirrel land and in human land. Okay. So the first one is what I call follow a purpose, not a person. Follow a purpose, not a person. So the idea here is you really want to set up your organization where people don't have to check with someone to find out what is our mission, what is our vision, what is our strategy, what are our priorities. This is really powerful. It sounds small, but it's really powerful because if I have the authority to take action with the necessary information about what our organization or our team sees as most important, then I'm doing it in service of the organization versus trying to please my boss. This is where a lot of really unhealthy things start to happen in organizations when people are doing things because they're either trying to please someone or avoid someone's scorn or wrath or whatever, wherever you are on that
Or
spectrum.
win. I'm trying to
Yeah.
win, and it's me pitted against others, right? Um,
Yes, you're right. Right. So it's how can I look good versus so much more useful and so much more motivating is what are we all trying to achieve here? And how can we let Mary Parker Follett would say, let purpose be your invisible leader. So, how can we make sure that our big boss is what we're all trying to achieve? You could do that at an organizational level. And a missing piece that I see in so many companies is ideally you're also doing it at the level of the role. Does the person understand the purpose of their role? How success is measured for their role? What the priorities are for their role? The more clarity that individual has, the less they feel the need to go check with people and, sit there and wonder what they should be doing. It really like takes away those roadblocks to making progress.
and let me just add, as we go through each of these, the thing I would add to
Yeah.
this is that as important as this is, which it is, if your team is hybrid or working at distance, it's even more
Yes.
important, because some of
Mhm.
those things about purpose, like mission statement and vision and strategy and stuff, like we see in the hallway,
Yeah.
we see on the whiteboards, we see
Yeah.
on the monitors in the break room, like,
Mhm.
but right now all people see is the other end of their dining room table, right? Like, we
Yeah.
this becomes even more important. We have to be even more intentional about it when our teams are at distance, I would
Yeah,
say. So
absolutely.
what's
Intentional
the next?
and
Go ahead.
I was gonna say intentional and more, disciplined in having a cadence of reconnecting to those things. I often hear from leaders like, "But I told people the priorities." And I go, when did you tell them?" "6 months ago, I was so clear about the priorities."
It was, didn't they
Literally,
read the
right?
PowerPoint slides?
Yeah. Right. Ideally, there's like a rhythm to let's check in. Are we still on track? Do we know where we're going? Are we still on track? Weekly, at least monthly. I think it's so, so critical to just come back together and take a look at those.
I love that word cadence. I think it's exactly right. So the
Yeah.
second of the principles is,
Yes. Rely on context, not control. I see why you said that I like alliteration. I was like, where did you
whoa,
get that?
it's
It's
in
so
all
true.
four of them, for heaven's sakes.
My husband is a voiceover actor, and he is just finished narrating the audiobook version of Lead Together, and he was so angry with me because of all of the alliteration. And he's like, "Why do so many of the sentences have all the same letter?" So, I will take your comment as a compliment to soothe some of that
It is
reaction I
meant
had to.
as such, I promise you.
Thank you. All right, rely on context, not control. Yeah, this one is all about taking a look at, to what extent are you sharing with your team all of the information they need to make thoughtful decisions, to make strategic, informed decisions. So often I see organizations having tons and tons of rules, tons and tons and tons of policies. That could be really useful, but when you overdo it, then people kind of stop thinking entirely and they stop making good decisions essentially because they're just either they're trying to remember all the rules or they've forgotten all the rules because you had way too many.
Yeah.
This is something early on in my last company. One of our clients was Netflix, and something that I was really inspired by them is they use a lot of this very lightweight. Our policy, our clothing policy is use your best judgment. Our uh, reimbursement policy is spend company money as though it was your own.
You're on. Yep.
Things like that. Yeah. So this is all about, can you give people, instead of relying on rules, can you give people more reasons? Can you give people more history, more information, more like in 2020 at my company, we started sharing not just our revenues but also our profit and loss and our cash flows so that people all had the information they needed to go, "Oh, okay, that's why I shouldn't be that's why I should be cutting this expense." Or maybe I'll work fewer hours so that the company could save money. Just people start making incredibly improved decisions when there is that clear understanding of context.
100%. And again, there you said, even in just casual conversation, you said reasons, not rules. Just saying, this is how you do it with your alliteration. Number three, be a
That's
cultivator, not a
true.
collector.
Be a cultivator, not a collector. This is one of my favorites. So most organizations tend to see talent, employee talent, as this finite pool. Let me try to collect the best people for this role. Instead, these power with organizations really think more like cultivators. So, yes, of course, there are some great people out there, but how do we instead create an infinite field of talent? How do we constantly invest in people's skills and reduce barriers to entry where we don't need them? Do you really need people to have 10 years of experience to be good at this role? Maybe, but let's test that and test those assumptions, minimize barriers to entry, maximize how much you're investing in people's skills and knowledge.
And there's one more.
Yes, there is one more. Build a community, not a crowd. There's some alliteration again. Build a community, not a crowd. There's so much I could say about this one. Maybe the quick summary here is, a lot of people think about getting buy in. How do I get people bought in to this organization, to this change, to this idea? What I really encourage instead is thinking about, how do you get build in? So, not buy in, but build in. How do you get people to actually have an active voice and choice, right? Can they actually create the change with you? Can they create the organization with you? Can you get people involved in strategic planning? Can you give people opportunities to propose ideas? Or at the very least, to give feedback that you actually then come back and show them how you've implemented this. The more people feel that they're building something, the more commitment, sense of ownership, sense of motivation there is. And the better the thing is.
There's no doubt. So not only do we have something that's better, but
Mm.
even if we get exactly the same thing that the leader would have gotten themselves, it's
Yes.
different because it's ours, not
Yes.
theirs. And so when we build community by building commitment, and we build commitment by giving people.
So
You,
true.
you use the words voice and choice, and I would say
Mm.
that when you give people choice, you're giving them voice. I mean, they go
Mhm.
together
It's true.
100%. So.
Yeah.
uh,
But then it wouldn't rhyme.
I know, like I am bowing at the foot of your ability to use the words, and I already know that there's going to have to be some other way we can have another conversation. But I'm looking at the clock, and we do need to move on.
Yes.
I am
Yes.
talking with Tanya Luna about her fabulous new book about squirrels. No, I mean about power. It's called Lead Together. Stop squirreling away power and build a better team. So before we finish, I have a couple of other questions for you, and we could unpack a lot more in the book, talk about lots of other great stuff and lots of specific, tangible things that we can do, both as an individual leader as well as an organization. Um, but I want to ask you a couple other things, and one of them is this: what do you do for fun?
And just as you said that, for some reason, can you still hear me okay?
I hear you perfectly.
Okay, okay, great. I don't know, my headphones just gave up on me. Okay. Now, what do I do for fun? Well, I live with 32 animals and my husband. So, just spending time with our fur family, is always such a delight. I've been learning to play the piano, love swimming. I've been learning to tap dance. I used to tap dance as a kid, started tap dancing again, and I read constantly. I read fiction, I read nonfiction, and I write as well. I can keep going. I like to have fun.
So reading is the only thing you knew for sure I was going to ask you about. So what are you reading right now? You told me, but now
I
you're going to
did
tell
tell
everybody else.
I told you, I was like, "Are you sure you want me to mention this?" Okay, so I'm reading 2 things. One that it makes more sense than the other in the context of our conversation. The one that doesn't make sense is a horror comedy called John Dies at the End by David Wong. Why? I don't know. It seemed funny and fun and interesting. It is if you like horror comedy, I think you'll like it. The other one that I'm rereading, is called The Story of Bee by Daniel Quinn. And I should say, I'm dyslexic. I only listen to things. I don't read them. So the books that you're seeing behind me, for those of you who are on live, this is my husband's collection. All of mine is in my phone. Story of Bee is philosophical fiction about essentially how do we as humans, what's our relationship to both one another and other living beings? And so much of that actually touches on concepts of sharing power, but not just in the workplace, but with the natural world and with our communities.
So we will have links to both of those as well as this new book in
Yep.
the show
Thank you.
notes. So you can make sure that you go there if you're listening to the podcast later. Hope you'll do that. Now, the question you probably most wanted me to ask from the very beginning is like, okay, where can we learn more about you? Where do you want to point
Yay.
us? How can people connect with you? All of that. Here's your chance to do that while I hold up the book again.
All right, thank you. So lead together, stop squirreling away power, and build a better team. Available wherever books are sold, hopefully, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, that kind of thing. You could also go to my website, tanyaluna.com, TANIALUNA.com. Thank you. And yeah, you can get free resources related to the book. Check out my other books, other free resources, and continue the conversation about sharing power in the workplace and in the world.
Fantastic. So, Tanya, thank you so much. Excuse me for being here. But before we go, everybody, I have a question that I always ask you as an audience, and here it is. Now what? What action are you going to take as a result of having been here? What idea did you take down? I wrote all sorts of stuff down. I wrote down things like power is magic math. The idea of thinking about power is not a limited resource.
Mm.
While we used electricity as one example, that's a bad example because it could eventually shut down, but power
Solar,
doesn't have to.
solar, solar
It,
and wind.
yeah, but even then, like it might not make it into my house today,
Mm,
right? So from that perspective, but the reality is thinking about giving
mm,
away power, not giving up control might be the thing that you need to think about. Maybe
mm,
today is an episode where you got more about mindset, which
mm,
is perfectly fine. But my challenge to you is how do you start to think about those ideas and then put them into action? There were a number of very tangible things that Tanya mentioned that you could do. I hope that you will take one or more of those things to heart and take action. Uh, Tanya, thanks again so much for being here. It was such a pleasure. I enjoyed
such
our kind
a delight.
time so much.
Thank you, Kevin.
And everybody, if you liked this, then I hope you'll come back. And if you've been here before, I hope you'll tell somebody else that they should come as well. So if you're watching this later on YouTube or one of the other social channels, great. There's wherever you are, you can find more. But you can also go to wherever it is that you listen to podcasts and join us for the next episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Thanks, everybody.